So, you've read the headlines today. A brand spanking new study has found that doing away with traditional marriage laws has supposedly reduced suicide rates among gay teenagers by a whopping 14% in states that have embraced same-sex marriage. Here are just some of the glowing headlines. PBS NewsHour, same-sex marriage laws linked to fewer youth suicide attempts, new study says. Washington Post, legalizing same-sex marriage was associated with fewer youth suicide attempts, new study finds. The Guardian, drop in teenage suicide attempts linked to legalization of same-sex marriage. USA Today, study, teen suicide attempts fell as same-sex marriage was legalized. These headlines, which are just a tiny sampling of the blanket media coverage this study has received, obviously suggest that if conservatives would just drop their gold-darned old-fashioned opposition to same-sex marriage, kids would stop killing themselves. The study, printed in JAMA Pediatrics, concludes that same-sex marriage policies, quote, would be associated with more than 134,000 fewer adolescents attempting suicide every year. There's only one problem. The study really does not prove that. The study shows a basic correlation between loosening same-sex marriage law and suicide rate, but it does not show that same-sex marriage policies reduced adolescent suicide attempts as the study's conclusions state. In fact, the study itself acknowledges, quote, our analysis does not allow us to understand the mechanisms through which implementation of same-sex marriage policies reduced adolescent suicide attempts. In other words, they say they know same-sex marriage policies impacted suicide attempts, but they have no idea how. Well then. They also failed to rule out some of the most basic confounds for any sociological study like this. Socioeconomic status of the students themselves. Is it possible the students are committing suicide at a lower rate because their parents are making more money, for example? Is it possible that socioeconomic status also has an outsized impact on particular groups? Or how about the social acceptance of gays and lesbians without the legislative question? The study admits openly they couldn't check either of those confounds out. They said, quote, we also could not control for unmeasured individual-level characteristics, including socioeconomic status, or for unmeasured state characteristics that may change over time, such as religious affiliation or acceptance of religious minorities and sexual minorities. Also, the study fails to explain why non-LGBT students would see their suicide rates decline in states that approve same-sex marriage. How exactly is that supposed to work? Some straight kid doesn't kill himself because same-sex marriage just got approved? The research data shows variability in suicide rates in states over time as well. Why would the suicide rate drop precipitously between 2005 and 2007 among states that only legalized same-sex marriage in 2013 or 2014? The study doesn't explain. The study also averages out state data rather than showing a serious trend common to all states. That means a serious decline in suicide rate in Hawaii could wash out an increase in suicide rates in Delaware. Look at the charts. They're pretty messy. And there's a reason for that. The study says, quote, the analyses on the association between implementation of same-sex marriage policies and adolescent suicide attempts among those identifying as sexual minorities should be interpreted with caution, given the limited data availability on sexual orientation. Yet, their conclusions are bold. They say, quote, we provide evidence that implementation of same-sex marriage policies reduced adolescent suicide attempts. As countries around the world consider enabling or restricting same-sex marriage, we provide evidence that implementing same-sex marriage policies was associated with improved population health. Policymakers should consider the mental health consequences of same-sex marriage policies. So much for caution. Here's the bottom line. The study shows correlation, not causation. It openly ignores basic data that would be necessary in order to rule out confounding factors. It also averages data in order to draw conclusions that truly are state-specific. The study acknowledges its limitations, then draws extraordinarily strong conclusions. And, of course, the media runs with this. This is how cautious science becomes utterly uncautious conventional wisdom. Maybe same-sex marriage lowers suicide rates. Maybe it doesn't. This study doesn't prove it one way or another, but don't let the media tell you that. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Okay, lots to get to. Today we're going to talk a little bit about CPAC, or as Kellyanne Conway puts it, TPAC. She says now Trump Political Action Conference. We'll get to that in just a second. Plus, we have the mailbag today. Woo! This is why you need to subscribe so you can be part of the mailbag. We're going to have an extra juicy, long mailbag today. It's going to be like 15 minutes mailbag, so it's going to be excellent, and you're going to want to be part of it. So check that out and become a subscriber at dailywire.com. But first, we have to say thank you to our advertisers over at Lyft. So, as I have said before, my wife works really long hours because she's a medical resident, she's a doctor, and that means that sometimes she's coming home really late at night and she's really tired. And the people that she trusts to bring her home are the folks over at Lyft. Every Lyft driver is fully vetted through a 10-point safety standard, including criminal background, DMV background checks. You know you're going to get around quickly and safety. All their cars are supposed to be relatively new. I think they're all within the last 6 years, which means you're not going to get some old creeper pulling up in a 1979 Chevy Murata or whatever. Who cares? In any case, the Lyft app is the way to do this. It's a fantastic app, and you can tip in the app, which means that the drivers are happier, which means that you're going to be treated better. Lyft isn't the biggest ride-sharing app, but it is the fastest-growing ride-share app for a reason. Right now, Lyft is offering our listeners a special deal. Get 3 free rides up to $10 each. That's a $30 value when you enter that promo code Shapiro. Make sure that when you go to Lyft, you enter that promo code Shapiro. That's how they know that we sent you. Plus, you get 3 free rides up to $10 each, which is pretty awesome. Just download that free Lyft app today. Enter that promo code Shapiro in the payment section, and you get those 3 free rides. Lyft, they're the people that I trust for my wife to be driven around. When I have to be driven around, they're the people I trust, and I can't really speak any more highly of a company than that. Okay, so let's begin with what's going on at CPAC, aside from somebody apparently killing themselves and Richard Spencer being thrown out of the proceedings. So CPAC is always kind of a zoo. I've been to CPAC a bunch of times. It's always a lot of fun. This year, it should be particularly fun because it's Trump year, right? It's Trump year 0. So that means that everybody is very excited, as well they should be. There's a Republican president, there's a Republican House, there's a Republican Senate. There should be a lot of talk about policy. There should be a lot of talk about conservatism. It is called, after all, the Conservative Political Action Conference. Except that Kellyanne Conway just showed up there, like a few minutes ago, and apparently she said, she's making her first public appearance in weeks, she said that I think by tomorrow this will be TPAC. She was asked, how has Trump affected the conservative movement? She said, I think by tomorrow this will be TPAC, meaning the Trump Political Action Conference. And then she added that conservatism was, quote, sclerotic and dusty. Sclerotic and dusty. So let's start with that. No conservative political action conference should probably be advertising from one of its lead speakers that the founding ideology and founding idea upon which it's based is sclerotic and dusty. The hero worship for Trump is obviously over the top. I've been saying this for a long time. Call him when praise him when he's right, celebrate him when he's right, put on the MAGA hat when he's right. When he's wrong, say that he's wrong. But your philosophy should be what guides you, not your adherence to Trumpism. And I'm getting a lot of flack this morning because I made the same point about Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson over at Fox News, whose show is really very entertaining because he basically has on some idiot from the left every so often, and then he hammers them into the ground. And it's really entertaining stuff. And he does the Tucker Carlson patented bemused face kind of while he's on split screen, and he's really good at it, and he's a very talented host, and he's obviously getting huge ratings. One of the things that Tucker Carlson says in this Atlantic interview is that he has no set ideology. I mean, it's important to note about Tucker that when he started out early on, as the Atlantic reports, on CNN's Crossfire, he was basically a mainline partisan conservative. And then after he left CNN in 2005, he went libertarian, and now he's going full populist. And so Carlson was asked about this. Here's what he said. He said, I'm not much of an economic conservative. I'm not conservative at all on foreign policy. And then he says, so he was asked, well, why did you shift all your positions? He says, if your politics don't change when circumstances do, you're an idiot, you're a reactionary. And he says, my views are not super interesting. I have a feeling that, some of Tucker's views, I'm sure, shifted because the political ground map changed because of Trumpism, because of this nationalist populism. This idea that you're a reactionary if you stick to your principles, but you're not a reactionary if you shift them in reaction to events, is definitionally wrong. Reactionary means that you're reacting to events by shifting your principles and your philosophies. Now listen, Tucker can do whatever he wants, but it is dangerous for the movement as a whole to simply shift its philosophy based around whatever Trump wants that day or whatever events happen that day. That's not a philosophy that's worth upholding. That's not a set of values that's worth upholding. And so I think that we ought to be careful before we fall into the idolatrous trap of turning CPAC into TPAC, of recognizing that Trump is only important insofar as he advances conservative principles. When he breaks from those conservative principles, you shouldn't be celebrating TPAC, right? If TPAC and CPAC are the same thing, then let's just call it CPAC. And if TPAC is something different than CPAC, then maybe that ought to be called out a little bit. So that's a preliminary note on CPAC. It looks like it's going to be a fantastic event. It looks like a lot of fun stuff is going to be happening there, despite a lot of the confusion that surrounded it because of everything that happened with Milo. Apparently, Richard Spencer showed up and he was immediately tossed out. That is a good idea. And it's very funny. A lot of people have been talking this morning about the idea that if you don't let certain people speak at your event, this is called no platforming. No platforming is when there is a state group that refuses, that discriminates on the basis of viewpoint. That would be no platforming. It's also no platforming if you have a group that is dedicated to free speech, like, say, a university that says in its mission statement that we're dedicated to free speech and they're banning certain people. That would be no platforming. It's not no platforming for a conservative group to not have Bernie Sanders as the keynote speaker. In fact, it's the opposite of no platforming. Okay, no platforming is, if you think that no platforming means that you have a right to sit in my chair and take over my show, for example, or you have a right to take over CPAC's main stage, or you have a right to take over a historically black university and you're David Duke, right? You don't have a right to do that. It doesn't mean that once you're invited, you should be tossed out. If somebody invites you, then that is no platforming to disinvite them. But it is really, really, really silly to make the contention that you have a right to someone else's distribution mechanism for your message. That's actually the fairness doctrine, right? That's something that conservatives oppose. The left has been saying for years that talk radio should be hit with the fairness doctrine because it's all right-wingers. And the right has been saying, no, these are all private companies. They should be allowed to say and do what they want. You can't hold both ideas in your mind at once because they don't mesh. Okay, so no platforming is a bad thing if you actually define it the way it's supposed to be defined. If you define no platforming as everybody should be allowed to take over any stage that they want at any time, that's just silly. That's just silly. And it's actually indicative of your opinion on violation of rights. You're okay with violating rights so long as somebody's saying something that you want them to say. Okay. All of that said, the big issue of the day is actually not happening at CPAC. Around the country, CPAC is not, it doesn't really make a blip around the country. What does make a blip is all these town hall uprisings. So there's a lot of talk about paid protesters supposedly going into town hall meetings and ripping on Republican Congress people, trying to intimidate them into leaving Obamacare in place. Among the people pushing these things is Michael Moore. Here's Michael Moore talking about the wonders of these town hall protests.
Yeah, you could see just watching the footage there that nobody's being paid. They are there because they love this country, and they are coming out. And you know what? You're just seeing really the first week of these town
that's
halls.
What's crazy to me. I mean, when you look at, we were going back and looking at footage. We were talking about this today. The big town hall thing was August in 2009 because that was the August recess, and that's when those town halls happened. People getting yelled at, and there was a bill that was about to be passed, and the mobilization. This is only a month in, right? So this is way.
No. This makes the Tea Party look like preschool. I mean, seriously.
It makes that's silly. I mean, I love the left claiming the Tea Party was bad, but what's happening now is good. Listen, everybody has the right to protest, but the fact that the media continually downgrade, and I know that there was a reporter from Politico, I think, who was downgrading the Tea Party, claiming that was all fake, but this is all real. No. Now, I will say it's a mistake for right-wingers to immediately assume that all of this is fake, that it's all astroturfed. There's this tendency on both sides to do this. That the Tea Party was astroturfed by the Koch brothers, and that all these protests are astroturfed by other groups. If there's evidence of that, then show me the evidence of that. Let's not just throw out the idea that it's all astroturfed without a lot of evidence of that. I haven't seen tons of evidence of that. I've seen some evidence that some people are astroturfed, but the idea that everybody in all of these rooms is astroturfed, I don't think that's right. It's difficult to mobilize that many people on the basis of paying them $5 an hour. Sean Spicer basically said this, though. He came out and he said a lot of this is just manufactured.
I think there's a hybrid there. I think some people are clearly upset, but there is a bit of professional protester manufactured base in there. But there are people that are upset. But I also think that when you look at some of these districts and some of these things, it is not a representation of a member's district or an incident. It is a loud group, small group of people disrupting something in many cases for media attention. No offense. It's just, I think that necessarily, just because they're loud, doesn't necessarily mean that there are many. And I think in a lot of cases, that's what you're seeing.
And there's truth to some of that. That just because a group is very loud doesn't mean there are a lot of them. The alt-right is very loud. It doesn't mean they're a huge force. But it's a political mistake for spokespeople for presidents to go out there and say that when you can see a protest on TV, it's all fake, it's all astroturfed. It makes it look like a denial of reality. I said that, by the way, way back when. Okay, Robert Gibbs was the press secretary under Barack Obama, and here's what he said about town hall protests directed against President Obama's Obamacare.
Is it your contention, is it the White House contention, that the anger that some members of Congress are experiencing at town hall meetings, especially over health care reform, is manufactured? Is that?
I think some of it is, yes. In fact, I think you've had groups today, Conservatives for Patients' Rights, that have bragged about organizing and manufacturing that anger.
Okay, so again, it was bad when Gibbs says it. I'm not a big fan when Spicer says it. Just politically speaking, it's not smart. And it's especially not smart because it plays directly into the hands of the protesters. So, for example, here's one woman who comes out at one of these town hall events and she says, look, I'm not a paid protester. I'm here just to talk to you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton, for being here today. First of all, I'm Mary Story from Fayetteville, and I am not a paid protester.
Mary, can I address that point that you just made?
Yes.
I don't really care if anybody here is paid or not. You're all Arkansans, and I'm glad to hear from you. So, I know there's been some talk about that in the media. Some politicians have said that. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out tonight, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. This is part of what our country is all about.
Okay, so, good response here by Senator Cotton. A much better response than the response you got from Sean Spicer. But it does put people in an awkward position when you say everybody here is paid and somebody gets up and says, I'm not paid. So these town hall events, I want to talk a little bit more about them and what they're doing. But first, I want to say thank you to another one of our sponsors. These are the good folks over at CShow. So if you are super into comedy, if comedy is your thing, and right now, let's face it, I think everybody's into comedy because the world situation, above all, is entertaining. But if you need a break and you go home at night and you just want to watch some comedy, you need to go to CISO.com and you need to subscribe. It's like $3.99 a month for CISO, and it's got endless amounts of comedy. And we're talking about all of the old episodes of The Office and Parks and Rec and 30 Rock, and it's got all the old episodes of Monty Python, the entire backlog of Saturday Night Live back when it was good. It's got all sorts of new shows that they are producing, a bunch of which are really, really funny. If you go to CISO.com right now, SEESO.com right now, and sign up for a month free with the promo code BEN at checkout, number one, they know we sent you. Number two, you actually get to try it out for a month and see how great it is. And it really is great. I mean, basically at night, my wife comes home from having, worked on people who are dying because she's a doctor, and we sit down in front of CISO and we just lose our, I mean, it's really funny. It's really funny stuff. CISO.com, promo code Ben, and you can stream all the comedy that you want anytime, anywhere for $3.99 a month. It is the best comedy that is available. You get all the late night comedy the day after it airs also. So if you just want to be up on the news and see what all the late night hosts are saying, you can do that. Plus you get all the stand up from people like Louis C.K., who, no matter how lefty he is, Louis C.K. is really, really funny. And you can get all of his stand up. So it is the one-stop shop for comedy, and that's why you need to go to CISO.com, subscribe for $3.99 a month. But right now, use that promo code Ben, try it out for a month, and see if you like it. I promise you will. It's really, really funny stuff, really entertaining stuff. Okay, so back to these town hall events. So these town hall events have basically become a way for the left to put sympathetic faces on TV to talk about how terrible it would be if they repeal Obamacare. So here's an example of this. A woman gets up and she's asking Tom Cotton about her husband. And I just want to play this because I think that it's indicative of what exactly the media are trying to do and the sort of narratives that come into play here.
We're going Medicare my way. Not your way. My way. I've got a husband dying, and we can't afford. Let me tell you something. If you can get us better coverage than this, go for it. Let me tell you what we have, plus a lot of benefits that we need. We have $29 per month for my husband. Can you beat that? Can you? With all the congestive heart failures and open heart surgeries and we're trying. $29 per month. And he's a hard worker. Now, $39 for me.
Okay, so the reason that I play this is because I think this is what the media are looking for. What they're looking for is exactly this. They're looking for a woman to get up there and say, my husband's dying, keep Obamacare. And obviously your heart goes out to the woman whose husband has a serious health problem. Obviously. But to pretend that she has extra moral authority because she's experiencing tragedy, it's just not true. And it's something the left likes to play, but only selectively. So after 9/11, they said that the widows of 9/11, the Jersey girls, as they called them, they said that they had impeccable moral authority because they had spouses who died on 9/11. Therefore, they should be making policy for the whole country. And you heard this from Maureen Dowd. There was when I think it was Code Pink, when Cindy Sheehan, who had a son who died in Iraq, when she started talking, Maureen Dowd immediately said that she had absolute moral authority, not just moral authority, godlike moral authority to determine what policy should be and what policy would be. But when it comes to Pat Smith, I mean, Michelle Malkin makes this point, and she's right. When it comes to Pat Smith, the mother of Sean Smith, who was killed in Benghazi, she comes out and says, my son was killed in Benghazi, and that's a problem, and the entire media ignores her. Where'd the moral authority go? It's just gone, whoop, out, right? No more moral authority. It's been debunked. And the reason for that is because the left likes to use tragedy as a club with which to beat its enemies, but it will not allow there to be a common rule about tragedy. You know why? Because tragedy can't be a common rule. Because the vast majority of people in life have experienced some form of tragedy or another. And it doesn't make them experts on the topic. It doesn't mean that they should actually create the policy. In fact, there's a good case to be made that if you've experienced tragedy on a particular score, you should be the person who's least likely to make the policy. The logic being that if you're a doctor and your son comes into the waiting room with a cancerous tumor, you shouldn't be the one to operate on him. You're too close to the situation. Your empathy is skewing how you're actually going to treat the situation. It's why we all take doctors' advice rather than researching it on our own and then just determining that we're going to do X, Y, or Z. Like, we do our own research, but then we combine that empathy with actual expertise and expert advice. There's a guy named Professor Paul Bloom at Yale University. He's written an entire book on the fact that empathy makes for bad policy. He says emotional empathy is a different matter when it comes to guiding our moral judgments in political decisions. Recent research in neuroscience and psychology shows that empathy makes us biased, tribal, and often cruel. Why? Because if you have empathy for this lady right here, maybe you're being cruel to the millions of people who are forced to buy health insurance that they can't afford or forced off of health insurance that they could afford. And this is what Bernie Sanders said the other day. He says, what good is it to have the right to buy health care if you can't afford it? And the answer is, number one, it is the market system that makes health care affordable. But number two, it's a lot worse to me to have a system where you can afford health care and you're not allowed to get it because of Bernie Sanders. That seems worse to me. What Professor Bloom says is empathy is activated when you think about a specific individual, the so-called identifiable victim effect, but it fails to take broader considerations into account, which is why people will give tons of money when they see a wounded baby seal during a hurricane, but they won't give any money to hundreds of thousands of people being slaughtered in Syria because one is an identifiable victim and the other is not an identifiable victim. The point being here that when you form policy for millions of people, then it is imperative that you put your empathy to the side so that you can make good policy. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be empathetic. Doesn't mean you shouldn't feel for this lady. But this idea that the left keeps trotting out victims, and then we're supposed to make policy based on the fact that certain policies have certain effects, but the statistical impact is either small or is balanced out by other factors, that's really a bad way to make policy, but this is what the left is trotting out. In clip 16, we get this from another woman. She does the same sort of thing.
My family has been in the Ozarks since the 1800s. We are historically a Republican family. We're a farming family. We're an NRA family. We're an Army family. Aside from inheriting their patriotism and their work ethic, I unfortunately inherited an incurable genetic connective tissue disorder. I qualify for Medicare, but unfortunately it's useless for me since only 2 of my doctors, who are the only doctors in over a 500-mile radius who are familiar with my condition, accept Medicare. Without the coverage for pre-existing conditions, I will die. Will you commit to replacements in the same way that you have committed to the repeal?
Thank you, Katie.
Obviously, this is, and she gets a standing ovation for the question. Not even for the answer, right? Just for the question. And again, the idea is that her suffering confers a certain level of value to her opinion. Again, you have to feel awful for this person. You have to feel terrible for this person. And I promise you that if she started a charity fund, people would raise tons of money for her because, again, that identifiable victim effect means that our empathy for her means that we would help her out. But crafting a broad public policy around one person and their suffering and their tragedy is just not good public policy. It just isn't. It just isn't. So it's also worthwhile noting, by the way, that all these Republicans have already said that they want pre-existing conditions to be covered, which is something with which I disagree because that doesn't actually look like insurance anymore. But that's because I'm talking about broad public policy, not about having to win re-election when you've got these sort of sympathetic stories being trotted out on a routine basis. Okay, before we go to break here, I've said before that everybody needs to subscribe to dailywire.com. $8 a month you can subscribe. You can be part of the mailbag today, and that's going to be a really solid mailbag, so we're going to get into that in just a little while. If you subscribe right now, you can be part of this week's mailbag. We do take live questions on the mailbag, so we'll do all of that. But right now, if you subscribe annually, you also get a free copy of the DVD of The Arroyo. And I've been talking about this fictional film that takes place on the border. I wanted to show you some of the trailer so you know what you're getting when you subscribe.
You ever been to Mexico? Looks just like this. Same land, same sky. Everybody wants to be here. You ever wonder about that?
Over 1,500 in the last 6 weeks. That's just on my land. And that's just the ones I've counted. And we ain't got no problems at all to hear the politician tell it.
I get it. Times are hard in our community. We all want a magical cure to our problems.
Found another dead kid on my land. Third one this year.
Coyotes do pretty much as they please.
Did you hear about that mess up in Phoenix? A whole family slaughtered by the cartels.
What am I supposed to do, Ed? It's not my job to enforce federal law.
Then whose job is it? Hell, ain't nobody gonna help us down here. Not Uncle Sam, nobody. We ain't nothing but a nuisance to them. Except when it comes time to write the check.
Maybe it's time we helped ourselves. If you hurt my family, you should have told that boy to shoot me on sight.
Hello! Hello!
I was trying to avoid the OK Corral.
Well, you didn't.
So as you can see, it's really good. We're going to be live streaming it on Facebook, the entire movie, so you can get a taste of it on Friday. So check that out. And right now, if you get that annual subscription, you get a free copy of the Arroyo. Okay, so that ends our Facebook and YouTube today. But go over to dailywire.com and subscribe, or listen later at iTunes. We are the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Alrighty, so want to talk a little bit more about these protests because, again, I think that they are going to be the front page of every newspaper. It's what everybody on the left is focused on. But the other thing that people are going to be focused on is the Democrats trying to come up with a new strategy. And there's a real gap in the Democratic Party between people who think that they're going to win just by bashing on Trump and people who think they're going to win by recasting themselves as a party that actually cares about working people. I think the people who bash on Trump are going to win. I'll give you an example. Keith Ellison, they had last night a big debate on CNN. All the people who are running for the head of the DNC had a debate. And Keith Ellison, he said that he should already be impeached, Donald Trump.
I think that Donald Trump has already done a number of things which legitimately raise the question of impeachment. I mean, on day one, he was...
Okay, so, yeah, again, this is the stuff that's going to please the base, but is it necessarily going to make for good policy? No, there's no evidence that this makes for good policy or that it's going to win voters, because you're going to have to do something more than shout about Trump. It didn't work in this election cycle. I don't see why it would work in the next election cycle. Gemma Green, though, did the exact same thing. She's another one of these candidates, and she said that Trump is marching us toward fascism.
We don't have the luxury to take a back seat as this man is arrogantly marching us towards fascism.
Okay, so he's marching us. So they're all betting that Trump is actually going to do something really bad that they get to hang their hat on. So far, he hasn't. So far, he's been Trump, right? And that comes with some good and it comes with some bad, right? You get good Trump and you get bad Trump, right? It comes with some of both. But the idea that the American people are ready to throw him out on his rear for doing something, there's no poll data suggesting that. No matter how unpopular he is, and some polls have him up at 55 and some have him down at 39, there's a huge variability in his popularity right now from poll to poll. The idea that people want him impeached, I don't really see the evidence for any of that. Tom Perez, who's sort of the establishment insider pick at the Democratic Party, his case for being Democratic Party chair is a lot better. Here's what he had to say.
Well, here are the facts. Hillary Clinton won the Democratic primary. Hillary Clinton also won the popular vote. At the same time, because of the absence of transparency in the Democratic primary, there was a crisis of trust that ensued. And what we need in the chair of the Democratic Party is to make sure that in fact and in perception, every single day, you are fair and neutral. That's why when you asked the question before about primaries, you have to let the primary process go. If I were the chair, if I have the privilege of winning, for instance, one of the things I would recommend would be that we set the primary debate schedule long in advance.
So he's correct, but he's boring. And so the chances are really good that somebody like Keith Ellison, who electrifies with his sort of wild leftism, that he's going to win. That's not a good thing for the Democratic Party, which is probably a good thing for Republicans. Okay, we'll do some things I like, things I hate, and then the mailbag. So, things I like. We've been doing movies about con men the entire week. Probably the best movie about a con man. It's not really about a con. It's more about just a criminal. Is a movie called The Third Man. Fantastic film. The score is really bad, but the film itself is great. It's Carol Reed is the director, and it's Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton. And Orson Welles gives an iconic performance. The whole movie is about post-war occupied Berlin, and it's split into all of these different sectors. And there's an American named Harry Lime who is turned criminal, basically. He's been selling selling nefarious product to various players, and people are dying because of it. And his best friend, who's a reporter, goes to Berlin to check it out. And he's gone for almost the whole movie, Orson Welles. And then finally, when he shows up, he's so fantastic. Here's the most famous clip from the film.
Nobody thinks in terms of human beings. Governments don't. Why should we? They talk about the people and the proletariat. I talk about the suckers and the mugs. It's the same thing. They have their 5-year plans. So have I. I used to believe in God. Well, I still do believe in God only. I believe in God and mercy and all that, but the dead are happier dead. They don't miss much here, poor devils. What do you believe in? Oh, if you ever get Anna out of this mess, be kind to her. I think you'll find she's worth it. I wish I'd asked you to bring me some of these tablets from home. Holly, I'd like to cut you in, old man. There's nobody left in Vienna I can really trust, and we've always done everything together. When you make up your mind, send me a message. I'll meet you any place, any time. And when we do meet, old man, it's you I want to see. Not the police. Remember that, won't you? Don't be so gloomy. After all, it's not that awful. Well, what the fella said. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long, Holly.
It's a really good movie, and that is the best monologue, one of the best monologues in movie history right there from Orson Welles, because it really does express, I think, a political truth that too many people are apt to fall into, which is, I want what I want, and I want it when I want it. And I can still hold in my mind the idea that I believe in God while I do all of these terrible things, because after all, everybody does terrible things. Don't be Harry Lime, okay? He's the bad guy in the film. Don't be that guy. Okay, other things that I like. Mike Pence visited a Jewish cemetery. This is something that I think Trump should have done himself if he wanted to quiet all of the silly anti-Semitism overblown talk. But Mike Pence, there's a Jewish cemetery that was vandalized, and good for Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, goes to the cemetery and starts helping out at the cemetery, which is exactly what he should do.
I'm Mike Pence. I'm the Vice President of the United States of America. I spoke words earlier today in St. Louis that were from the heart. There is no place in America for hatred or acts of prejudice or violence or anti-Semitism. I must tell you, the people of Missouri are inspiring the nation by your love and care for this place, for the Jewish community in Missouri, and I want to thank you for that inspiration, for showing the world what America's really all about.
Okay, so good for Mike Pence, and by the way, that is what America is about. This is not an anti-Semitic country; it's the greatest country in history for Jews, and so good for Mike Pence. Okay, time for a couple of things that I hate really quickly. So, things that I hate. There's this meme that's going around now of Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is one of Donald Trump's policy advisors, and it shows Stephen Miller straightening his tie before an interview. The left has gone nuts over this. Okay, why? Why is the left going nuts over him straightening his tie or buttoning his coat? Because they're suggesting that he's actually making a white power sign. Okay, what's the white power sign here? If you can't see it, it looks like he's straightening his tie with his fingers on one hand and and buttoning his coat with the other hand at the same time that he's doing this. Okay, which is not rare. Everybody does that. You can see his fingers are actually on his tie. You can see that. What they're saying he's doing is he's forming the letter W with his fingers on his left hand, and with his right hand or with his left hand whichever hand with his right hand he's forming a W, and with his left hand he's forming a P, right, for white power. No, he isn't, okay? Like, really, no. Number one, he wouldn't do that publicly if he were a white supremacist. Number two, that's clearly not what he's doing. It's a picture of him straightening his tie and his jacket, but everybody is so crazy looking for conspiracy theories that they fall into this idiotic trap. Okay, other things. So that's been dispensed with. It's stupid. If you see people passing it around, it's because they're morons. Okay, other things that I hate. So Donald Trump takes back the Barack Obama cram down on transgender bathrooms. And this transgender bathroom bill basically said that all public facilities now have to let men who think they're women into women's locker rooms and women's bathrooms. And number one, that's not a federal issue. Number two, the federal government does not have the wherewithal to redefine sex along non-biological lines. There is nothing in the Constitution that gives them that power or delegates it to them. This is a local issue. Number three, just as a policy matter, men should not go into women's bathrooms. And I keep hearing people say, well, what's the big deal if a man who's dressed up as a woman or who's had surgeries or any of this stuff has hormone treatment, goes into a women's bathroom, he looks like a woman. Okay, that's not what transgenderism is. Transgenderism is the suggestion that I, right now, could walk into a women's bathroom and if I identify as female, then that's perfectly okay. No, I shouldn't be able to walk into a women's bathroom. Identify however you want. No one cares. But if you walk into a lady's bathroom looking like a dude, then I think women have a right to feel uncomfortable. And I would feel uncomfortable with you walking into a bathroom after my wife if you're a hulking 6'5" man. It's not something that makes me happy. Is that crazy? Is that profiling? No, I don't think it is. And I would feel that way if a straight man, a man who identified as a man, felt that way, and I don't see why I should change my opinion just because the man says that he identifies as a woman. Nonetheless, there's a singer who performed at the inauguration who says she's very disappointed by Trump's rollback of the transgender student rules. She tweeted out, "I'm obviously disappointed in the decision to send the transgender bathroom issue to the states to decide, #sisterlove, because she has a brother who is transgender, and she thinks that he's now a woman. Real Donald Trump gave me the honor to sing at the inauguration. Please give me and my sis the honor to talk transgender rights." Okay, why? Why? I mean, you can talk, listen, no one's silencing you, say whatever you want to say, but the idea that this is, again, this is the empathy masquerading as policy point. Just because you love somebody doesn't mean that what they do ought to make public policy, particularly public policy around something as central as sex, as whether men are men or men are women. Okay. A few entries from the mailbag. So, William writes, please explain why police, firefighters, and military are not socialist programs while single-payer system is. Also, in your opinion, is there a difference between socialism and democratic socialism? So police, firefighters, and military are not all quite the same thing. The reason that the police and the firefighters are public programs is because everyone has an equal right, everyone has an equal access, I should say, to the use of the police and firefighter services. When it comes to single payer, you're telling people that they must buy into a system that they may never access. I actually see why people would compare police and firefighters to single payer. I think that the distinction would be that you actually could theoretically privatize the police and firefighters. You actually could, and in many areas of the country, they do privatize police and firefighters. The only reason not to do that is because these places are really understaffed, right? And crime actually has spillover externalities that health doesn't. If firefighters is a perfect example of this. If you live next to somebody else's house and their house goes on fire, then if they've not bought into the fire collective, it could hurt you because the fire can jump house to house. And the same thing is not true with single-payer health care. If you have cancer, I'm not catching your cancer. There's a case to be made that with communicable disease, it's a slightly different story. As far as the military is a socialist program. I mean, the truth is all of these things are socialist programs. Firefighter, police, military, they are socialist programs. They also go under designated services of government, and healthcare does not go under designated service of government because the private market takes care of it. Also because the police are tasked with specifically protecting you, right? The government actually has certain tasks, and that task is to protect your life, liberty, and property from other people. Not from you, from other people, and not by compelling service. So that's a different thing. Okay, Morris writes, what is the value of the Constitution? I consider myself to be a constitutional conservative. I believe society should live by the Constitution. Why is it so important? The Constitution is important because undergirding the Constitution are certain basic values. Among those values, people are capable of both good and evil. You need power and ambition to check power and ambition. And the rights that you have as a human being, those are not limited by the rights that government has because government doesn't have rights. All the government can do is stop people from violating your rights. Those are the ideas undergirding the Constitution. That's why the Constitution is important. Stephen says, is there going to be a sequel to True Allegiance? And if so, when can we expect it? I'm thinking about it. It really depends on sort of the amount of time I have on my hands. I'm in the middle of writing a couple of other books as well, so I think those will probably come out first. Austin says, hey Ben, in light of the recent debates over the raising of the federal minimum wage, I've begun to think about why it is necessary in the first place. I think the minimum wage should be abolished, but my only question is what would happen if a business owner decided to severely underpay his or her employees? Well, you can't decide to underpay your employees. The person has to consent. So if you really, let's put it this way. If you tried to hire people at 1 cent a day to work at McDonald's, no one would ever work at McDonald's because no one can live on 1 cent a day. The whole minimum wage discussion suggests that there is no consent on the part of the employee when in fact there is consent on the part of the employee. There may be a lot of competition for that particular slot, but that does not necessarily mean that there's no consent that's given. There's competition for every job in the universe. Alex says, hey Ben, I spent the last week in London and Dublin, couldn't help but notice the cleanliness, apparent safety, and lack of homelessness in the streets. Granted, this may have been a tourist vision, it occurred to me our major cities may not appear the same way to foreign visitors. Following conservative principles, how can we make cities like LA and San Francisco safer and cleaner in comparison with these socialist European countries? Well, number one, there is a different population group in places like London and Dublin and different cultures that adhere. So if you're drafting populations that come from places where leaving trash on the street is more common, you're going to get more people who leave trash on the street more commonly. This is why if you actually go to a lot of these European countries with heavy Muslim populations from areas that are not used to cleanliness in the streets per se, then you might have less cleanliness in the streets. Culture does have an impact on things like litter. As far as what you can do to stop this, I mean, number one, enforce crime. Stop bending before crime. Rudy Giuliani obviously did this when he talked about broken windows theory, with the suggestion that if you enforce small crimes, big crimes tend to go away a lot faster. That is absolutely true. Nick says, what are your thoughts on the designated hitter rule? So I'm not a fan of the designated hitter rule. The reason I'm not a fan of the designated hitter rule is because I don't think that you should have a player who may be the best hitter on your team who can't play the field. It seems to me that if you don't have a designated shooter rule in the NBA, where you have somebody who plays defense, right? You have like Dennis Rodman play defense, and then as he runs halfway down the court, suddenly Larry Bird steps in. Right? Suddenly Jordan steps off the bench to take over for him on offense, and then as soon as they cross half court again, Dennis Rodman goes back over there. If you can't play baseball, don't play baseball. I don't believe in the designated hitter rule. Gabe says, Ben, what made you want to study law? When did you know you wanted to go to law school? What are your specific interests in the law? So ideologically, I'm very interested in the Constitution. I love constitutional law. I find it fascinating. The theory of law is really interesting to me. As far as studying law, I actually didn't know I wanted to study law. I went to school in political science, and then I took the LSAT, and then basically I applied to a bunch of schools, and when I got into Harvard, I went. It wasn't like I was thinking I really want to work at a corporate law firm, because I didn't. It wasn't something that I was deeply interested in. And in fact, I only worked at a corporate law firm for about 10 months before I quit. And then I practiced law with a talk radio network. At the same time, I was doing some production work so I could learn the radio business. Jeff writes, hey Ben, I streamed your lecture at UC Santa Barbara. I loved every second of it. There was a question asked about pre-existing conditions and health insurance, and your answer was 100% logical. However, my father disagrees with you. I can't seem to get the point across that healthcare is a commodity. He views it as a moral standpoint, which isn't out of the ordinary. My question is, what happens if someone gets diagnosed with cancer, for example, and is refused coverage before or even after purchasing insurance? Is there any perfect solution? Well, there is no perfect solution from the insurance field. There is a good solution from the aspect of you have a community that comes together to help support this person, helps make sure the person has the money for care. But the idea that you can compel somebody else to pay for your health care, what that really encourages is people not to get insurance in the first place. If you're going to have insurance companies that function, they actually have to insure. They can't just be health care coverage. If you could pay in $10 and get out $1,000, you would never bother to sign up for health insurance in the first place. You would just wait to get sick, pay $10 in, get $1,000 out. That's not an insurance company now. Now it's just a gumball machine. And that's not how health insurance is going to stay solvent. It's not how health insurance is going to work. The problem with the commodity versus right discussion is that it's seeing things in two different ways. If you say that healthcare is a right, I would say access to healthcare certainly is a right. If you have the capacity to go hire a doctor, you should be able to hire a doctor. You don't have the right to go to my wife's, to come to our house, knock on the door in the middle of the night, and tell my wife to fix your broken leg. Right? Because that's enslaving my wife. That's involuntary servitude. You can't do that. And what you can do is you can go to all your friends and then offer to pay my wife, and my wife would be happy to do that. She might be even happy to waive the fee. But that's up to her. You can't steal somebody else's livelihood. You can't steal somebody else's autonomy because you have a tragedy in your life. Healthcare is a commodity just like everything else. If it weren't a commodity, then you would be able to get it for free without having to pressure anybody. Right? Air is not a commodity because you don't have to pay for it. It's all around you. Right? Water is a commodity because it doesn't just magically flow out of your tap. People actually have to work for it. So the differentiation between a commodity and not a commodity is whether there is a scarcity of it and somebody has to work to bring it to you. If there's a scarcity and someone has to work to bring it to you, obviously it's a commodity. It doesn't matter what you think of it, it's still a commodity. It doesn't matter whether you think this table is a chair, it's still a table. Healthcare is a commodity, it is not a right. You can hope that you have a right to healthcare, a right to access to healthcare, but if your right overrides someone else's rights to free use of their services, then you are now compelling them, and that's you invading their rights. Spencer says, hey Ben, suppose California is able to secede. What's the likely outcome? Assuming you'd move, where would you go? So California is not going to secede. Nobody's seceding. Okay, all of this is hyper talk. As far as where would I move if this happened, I'd probably end up moving to Texas, I would imagine. Texas seems like a wonderful state. Every time I visit it, it makes me happy. One more question. I'm an unreligious, bipartisan Native American from South Florida that laughs at lefties for leaving trash at a spot they were protesting to keep clean, Dakota Access Pipeline. Having said that, why don't they get to keep their sacred lands unbesmirched? If someone tried to tear down a church or JCC or Western religious place, wouldn't people invoke religious sacredness to not allow such things? So, yes, if the Native American tribes had actually sued in timely fashion, and there were 9 out of 10 Native American tribes that didn't care or sued and were overturned, if you sue to stop the desecration of a holy site, then number one, you'll probably win. But number two, you actually have to do so in a timely fashion. You don't get to wait until the project's already been done. There was fair notice. You wait until the day before, and then you show up and chain yourself to the bulldozer. That's just not fair to the developer, and it's not fair to anybody else. But obviously, I think that religious rights extend to Native American burial places. And I think that's absolutely true. I do want to go back and clarify something on the police, firefighters, and military example, because I think that if I wasn't clear enough, I want to clarify that, because I think it's a really good question. Again, there are certain things you have a right to from the government, okay, and that is protection of your life. That's the sole reason for having the government, is protection of your life, basically, your life, your liberty, and your property. If the government can't protect you and can't protect your rights in life, liberty, and property, the government ought not exist. There's no point to the government at that point. So does that mean that it's socialist to tax people for the police and the firefighters and the military? I don't think that it's socialist. It's socialist, I suppose, in the essence that you're telling people to pay money into a system that they may not get out, but that's very, I think that's a very dicey proposal, because the fact is that you are protected by the military just as much as the guy next door to you. You are protected by the police just as much as the guy next door to you. In healthcare, that's not true. You're not protected in healthcare just as much as the guy next door to you, because number one, you should have the ability to go above and beyond, and number two, your pre-existing conditions may not be your neighbor's pre-existing conditions. And number three, you actually have a role in how your healthcare goes over the course of your life. Like, people tend to ignore this, but not every disease that you get is something that was completely unrelated to behavior. Plus, if you think down the line, you're going to be buying insurance from a very young age, as I do. And the goal in police and firefighting and military is not to have a cheap and competition in the military is not even a thing. How could there be competition in the military? Competition in the police realm is not a thing, right? Competition in the healthcare realm is. If you want cheaper, faster service, you need to have competition in that realm, which is why private markers from an effectiveness standpoint are better than a socialized healthcare point of view. From a moral standpoint, for all the reasons I just talked about as far as confiscating the services of someone else, you have to impress my wife into service as a doctor in order to have healthcare be a right. You don't have to impress any policeman into service as a policeman, specifically because what you're basically doing is you are hiring police officers to protect everybody equally in society. That's the only reason government exists. Every government is a touch of socialism. Every government aspect is a touch of confiscating wealth in order to serve everybody. But the question is, should the government exist or not? Unless you're an anarchist, you believe the government is there to actually protect you against other people. The role of government is to protect you from externalities like crime, externalities like fire, externalities like foreign threat. I hope that was a little bit clearer than my original answer. Okay, thanks so much. We will see you next week. We'll be back, and we'll give you the update on CPAC and everything else. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.